Okay, so you want to own a diamond mine. Buy some land, find the sparkly rocks, sell them to a jeweler, watch the money roll in forever. Because diamonds are forever, right? Here's the strange part. Most companies that go looking for a diamond mine never find one worth building. Most of the ones that do find something spend a decade and hundreds of millions of dollars before they know if it was worth it. And the industry's single largest player just spent the last 2 years writing down billions in unsold inventory while quietly trying to sell itself off. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why finding diamonds is the easy part and mining them profitably is the hard part, how one company controlled the price of diamonds worldwide for most of the 20th century without owning most of the mines, why a laboratory in a warehouse can now make the exact same stone nature took 1 billion years to create, and why the biggest threat to your diamond mine isn't a rival miner. It's a machine. Let's start with the part nobody tells you before you spend a single dollar, which is that you don't actually get to choose where diamonds are. Diamonds form under specific and extremely rare geological conditions, enormous pressure and heat, roughly 150 kilometers underground, and they only reach the surface through a very specific type of volcanic pipe called a kimberlite pipe. Geologists have identified more than 6,000 kimberlite pipes on Earth. Of those 6,000, only about 1,000 contain diamonds at all. And of that 1,000, only around 50 have ever contained diamonds in a concentration and quality high enough to justify building a mine. That means your odds of finding a genuinely mineable diamond deposit, even after you've found a kimberlite pipe in the first place, are worse than 1 in 100. Most exploration companies spend their entire existence and their investors' entire patience without ever finding the one pipe that pays for all the others. So before you build anything, you're paying for exploration. And this stage alone can bankrupt you. A serious diamond exploration program. Aerial surveys, ground sampling, exploratory drilling, and bulk sample testing to estimate what's actually down there routinely costs tens of millions of dollars and takes 5 to 10 years, with no guarantee of a result at the end of it. Rio Tinto explored the site that became the Diavik mine in Canada's Northwest Territories for years before committing to construction. And even after finding genuinely rich kimberlite pipes there, it took until 2003 to bring the mine into production, and it cost roughly $1.3 billion to build. In one of the most remote, roadless parts of the Arctic, where equipment can only be trucked in during a few winter weeks each year, over a frozen ice road that itself costs tens of millions of dollars annually just to maintain. Let's talk price tiers, because like everything else in this genre, size changes the entire business. At the bottom, you have small-scale alluvial operations mining diamonds that have already eroded out of their original kimberlite source and washed into riverbeds, common across parts of West and Central Africa. These can be started for as little as a few $100,000, shovels, sieves, a small processing setup, and a permit. The diamonds you find are usually smaller and lower quality, but the barrier to entry is tiny compared to anything else in this industry. This is also historically where the phrase blood diamond comes from, because alluvial deposits are shallow, unsecured, and spread across wide areas, making them almost impossible for any government to fully control, which is exactly what allowed armed groups in Sierra Leone and Angola to finance civil wars through diamond sales in the 1990s, eventually forcing the industry to create the Kimberley process in 2003, a certification system meant to keep conflict diamonds out of the legitimate supply chain, with mixed and heavily debated success ever since. The middle tier is a proper hard rock kimberlite mine of moderate size, the kind of operation that costs $200 million to $1 billion to build. Once you include the processing plant, the tailings infrastructure, and the roads or airstrips needed to get people and equipment to what is very often an extremely remote location. And at the top of the market, you have mines like Jwaneng in Botswana, often called the richest diamond mine in the world by value, a joint venture between De Beers and the government of Botswana called Debswana, which alone has generated tens of billions of dollars in revenue over its operating life, and effectively built the modern Botswanan economy around it. Here's the number that explains why this business is so brutal, even once you've built the mine, and it's the grade. Diamond ore grade is measured in carats per ton of rock processed, and even a genuinely excellent mine might only yield 1 or 2 carats per 100 tons of ore. That means to extract a meaningful quantity of diamonds, you are physically moving, crushing, and processing an almost unimaginable volume of rock, day after day, year after year, for a payload that in most cases amounts to a small handful of stones per truckload once everything else is discarded as waste. This is why diamond mines are physically some of the largest excavation projects on the planet. The main pit at Zhuaneng is deep enough and wide enough to be visible from space, and it exists entirely because the concentration of the actual product inside all that rock is almost vanishingly small. Now, here's where the business gets genuinely strange. Because for most of the 20th century, the price of diamonds had almost nothing to do with how many diamonds actually existed. Starting in the 1930s, a company called De Beers built something close to a full monopoly over the global diamond trade. At its peak, controlling somewhere around 80 to 90% of the world's rough diamond supply. De Beers didn't just mine diamonds, it bought up production from other miners around the world and funneled almost the entire global supply through a single sales channel in London, historically called the Central Selling Organization. By controlling the tap, De Beers could simply hold diamonds back during any period when demand softened, physically warehousing enormous stockpiles, rather than letting supply exceed what the market would pay for at the price De Beers wanted. This is also the same company that ran the "A Diamond is Forever" advertising campaign starting in 1947, a slogan credited with single-handedly manufacturing the modern cultural expectation that an engagement requires a diamond ring, costing a specific multiple of a month's salary, an idea that did not meaningfully exist as a cultural norm before that advertising campaign existed. That monopoly has eroded significantly since the 1990s and 2000s, as antitrust regulators in the United States and elsewhere went after De Beers' pricing practices, and as major new diamond-producing regions, most importantly Russia, through the state-linked company Alrosa, and Canada through mines like Diavik and Ekati, began selling independently outside De Beers' control. De Beers' share of global rough diamond supply today is estimated at somewhere around 30 to 35%. Still enormous, but nothing close to the near total control it once held. And that shift matters enormously for anyone thinking about entering this business today, because it means nobody can simply hold the entire market's supply back, the way De Beers once did when prices got soft. Which brings us to the disaster sitting on top of the entire industry right now. The one that didn't come from underground, it came from a laboratory. Lab-grown diamonds, chemically and structurally identical to mined diamonds, made through high-pressure, high-temperature synthesis, or chemical vapor deposition, have gone from a novelty niche product to a mainstream one in less than a decade. Wholesale prices for lab-grown diamonds have collapsed by more than 80%. Since the mid-2010s, as production scaled up and technology improved, and that collapse has dragged natural diamond prices down with it because a consumer looking at a visually identical stone at a fraction of the price increasingly doesn't care where it came from a billion years ago. De Beers itself, a company that spent decades building the cultural argument that a diamond's value comes from its natural rarity, was forced to launch its own lab-grown diamond brand called Lightbox in 2018, essentially competing against the premise of its own advertising history before scaling that effort back years later as the strategy shifted again. The financial damage from this shift has been enormous and very recent. De Beers has written down billions of dollars in unsold rough diamond inventory over the past few years as demand softened and prices fell, and its parent company, Anglo American, announced plans to spin off or sell De Beers entirely. A company that once represented one of the most dominant monopolies in the history of global commerce, now considered a drag on its parent's balance sheet. Meanwhile, entire mines that were profitable for decades have simply run out. Rio Tinto's Argyle mine in Western Australia, which for years produced roughly 90% of the world's supply of rare pink diamonds, some of the most valuable stones on Earth by carat, closed permanently in November of 2020, after the economically recoverable ore was exhausted, taking that supply of pink diamonds essentially off the market forever, and instantly making every pink diamond already in circulation dramatically more valuable. A strange reminder that in this industry, closing a mine can sometimes be worth more to existing stockholders than opening one. Step back for a second because this industry is a paradox in a way that's almost unique even among unusual businesses. You're digging for a product whose value was, for most of a century, artificially manufactured through advertising and supply control, rather than existing naturally in the marketplace the way oil or copper does, because diamonds are not actually rare in the way the marketing insists. They're simply rare in the specific gem quality sizes people want to buy. And that scarcity was heavily manufactured by keeping enormous stockpiles off the market. And now that manufactured scarcity is being undercut by a competitor that can produce a physically identical product on demand in a warehouse for a fraction of the price at exactly the same time. Major natural sources like argile are running dry. You're not really mining a mineral. You're mining a cultural belief system that took 100 years to build and is now unwinding in real time. Two scenarios, real numbers. Scenario 1, a small alluvial operation in a producing region, like Sierra Leone or the Democratic Republic of Congo, started for a few $100,000 in equipment and permits. With a skilled crew and a decent stretch of riverbed, you might process enough gravel to recover a modest but steady flow of smaller stones, generating revenue in the tens of thousands to low hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Extremely volatile, entirely dependent on a lucky find, and exposed to the same collapsing lower-end pricing. That lab-grown competition has hit hardest, since it's the small, lower-quality stones that lab-grown diamonds compete against most directly. Scenario 2. A major kimberlite mine built for $800 million to $1.3 billion. The Diavik scale of operation. Processing millions of tons of ore a year for a yield measured in a few million carats annually. At peak historical pricing, a mine like this could generate hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue, funding entire national economies, the way Jwaneng funded Botswana's development for decades. But run that same mine today, against declining natural diamond prices, a lab-grown competitor eating the mid-market from below, and a finite ore body that will eventually run out exactly the way Argyle's did, and the multi-decade payback math that justified the original billion-dollar construction cost looks considerably less certain than it did 20 years ago, which is precisely why Diavik itself, after more than 2 decades of production, ceased operations as its economically viable ore ran out, and why the company that once controlled the entire global market is now trying to find a buyer for itself. Either way, you were never really selling a rock, you were selling scarcity, and scarcity, it turns out, is a much harder thing to keep underground than diamonds ever were.